A meeting of emerging markets and a meeting of the future. The World Economic Forum's annual meeting of the new champions, often called Summer Davos, is on in Tianjin, a major coastal city in northern China. Chinese Premier Li Qiang has just given an address at the opening plenary. The president of Ecuador, prime ministers of Singapore, Kyrgyzstan, Senegal and Vietnam are attending this year's annual meeting, together with some 1,700 representatives from over 90 countries and regions around the world. As China contributes around 30% of global growth annually, what opportunities could emerge through deeper engagement with China's market and its innovation ecosystem? And why has AI become a buzzword throughout this year's meeting? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. I'm pleased to be joined from Shanghai by Dan Wang, China Director of Eurasia Group; from Singapore, Bert Hofman, Professor at the East Asian Institute at the National University of Singapore; from Guangzhou in southern China's Guangdong province, Carl Fei, Professor of Strategy at BI Norwegian Business School in Oslo, Norway; and last but not least, from Shanghai, Huang Jing, Distinguished Professor at Shanghai International Studies University. The warmest welcome to all of you. The Chinese Premier has just given an address at the opening plenary of this year's Summer Davos in Tianjin, and three observations he mentioned about the global trade landscape. First of all, he talked about global south on the rise, that the global economy and trade landscape is undergoing profound changes driven by factors such as geopolitics, technological innovation and structural shifts. It is important, he said, to grasp the underlying trends, and the number one notable trend that he mentioned was the global trading system become increasingly diversified, the global south rising rapidly in influence. The second main observation he talked about was trade landscape in transition. He was talking about the slowing down of traditional trade and the ascendancy of new types of trade, including digital trade and services, but the rise also of global protectionism, as well as the intensification of economic and trade frictions. The third observation he was talking about was more trade barriers. As a result, more regional trade agreements, alluding to a kind of fragmentation of global trade landscape. Dan Wang, let me go to you. What is your take on the significance of Premier Li's speech and the observations he was talking about?
It is quite a critical moment for the world trade to get into this new global order. And when we look at China, there's a lot of trade diversion, a lot of the offshoring of domestic capacity. And for global companies, they're seeking new investment in new markets. So in the process, a lot of capacities will be destroyed, but new capacities will be created. And for many of the investors, the most important thing to identify is what's on the rise. What Premier Li has mentioned on the technological front, on the productivity front, this is what's going to determine the future 20 years of growth.
Professor Huang, let me go to you. Global South on the rise. How significant is that for China and the global trade picture as we're seeing against the geopolitical uncertainty that has been unfolding in the Middle East? What's the significance of that? Is the Global South going to be a formidable force to reckon with in terms of economic influence and trade connectivity?
A kind of fact everybody saying that global rise, like you said, is on the rise, and that's undeniable, and which means more potentials. But what we notice here is that the majority of global South countries, especially in Asian Pacific, has been stable, and the policy has been consistent, and the market has been prosperous. Of course, we have this kind of conflict in the Middle East, which, in my view, will be limited, will be contained for whatever reason. What really worrisome is that the collective West, especially the United States, is politically uncertain, economically, and quite volatile and socially highly divided. I think that great uncertainty from the developed or global north has a very negative impact on the economy. In that regard, I think global south has to be kind of play more and more important role at the step up.
But
For that reason, I think the Davos Tianjin conference will kind of cast a very positive impact on the global economy, given that
but
China is a leading country, not only in economic development, but also in global south.
yeah, okay. Unfortunately, the audio quality is not that good. We'll try to fix that. Meanwhile, Bert, let me go to you. The International Monetary Fund projected in April that the world economy is going to grow at a subdued rate of 2.8%, slower than their projection of over 3%. Previously. So against this background, what do you think is the messages and the importance of this year's Davos with the focus on the Global South?
Well, look, one of the big factors behind the IMF's projections was the uncertainty that trade policies around the world have created, and if you want, the disagreement on how the trade system should look like going forward. This did not even take into account the accelerated tariffs that were imposed by the United States. They're now on pause, but very soon we'll know whether they will impose it. So it could actually turn out to be worse. What is important, therefore, is first to see how the significance of open trade and how important it is for global growth. Second, it is important to see how this agreement on the international trade rules, which is not there at the moment, how that would help in creating the certainty for countries, big and small, to do international trade. Because international trade, in the end, is to get the best possible outcome for everybody and to get the best possible technologies in the countries. And at the moment, frankly, we're on hold on that.
Carl, what is your take on the difference in perspective we're seeing in the summer Davos, especially this year? Davos used to be a place where, you know, the global thinkers and leaders converge, and a lot of it comes from the developed West. Whereas here in the Chinese city of Tianjin, especially in China, we're seeing more voices, more deliberation about what Global South can do together. Is there a new trend? And are we really on the right track with the right capacity to try to drive changes to a new trade landscape and potentially a new trade order in the future?
So I think it's great that the World Economic Forum has also this new champions summit or summer Davos to supplement their January conference in Switzerland. This conference is indeed focused on those rising countries and those rising companies. I've attended it several times myself. And this is really what we need because the global south is taking a larger percentage of the world GDP and world growth. And so I think China has been wise to put a lot of focus on this. This is not sort of a quick shift of China to focus more on the global south, but China, with the Belt and Road policy and other efforts, has for quite a while been step by step building up goodwill and building up relations with these countries. For example, there are a number of sub-summits at the Summer Davos Conference now, such as some activity with Africa, including the Ghana Summit. And I think these activities will serve China really well. The other thing is that the most important thing for business leaders is actually stability. Even if the rules are not so ideal that are chosen and laws, it's more important that there's stability than probably exactly what is chosen. And every country has some strengths and weaknesses. China has always been very predictable and good in being stable, and this is now really helping them out. Unfortunately, my home country, I'm actually originally from the US, despite living in Norway now, the US, has normally been quite good in stability and predictability, but now has, for some reason, started to be very unpredictable and not in favor of free trade. I surely hope that this will change moving forward.
Some people are comparing this moment with 2008 when the world convened, when business leaders converged to talk about what to do, where to go next in the heart of the international financial crisis. Dan Wang, do you see such a moment or do you see it differently? And what do China and its Global South peers, of course, Global North countries, welcome? What solution can countries, can businesses propose and political leaders propose going forward?
I don't think we're really at the phase of convergence yet. There are a lot of disagreements between different continents. And when it comes to the national security, where the global trade is going, globalization versus regionalization, the competition between different currencies, those conversations have only just started, especially when it comes to the China-US talk. What will happen after 90 days of the trade truce will determine a lot of the things, what other countries will respond. So I think this summer Davos is at the right time to bring people together, especially to give a showcase what the global South can achieve in the background of this uncertainty. The trade diversion to ASEAN countries, to Eastern European, to Middle East and North Africa is real. And the globalization of a Chinese company is only getting started. So when we look at what's going to happen next, it's not just the economic driver. It's more of what the global leaders in major regions decide where to go.
One big topic, of course, Premier Li talks about no law of the jungle, but one big topic and interest point is really surrounding AI. A lot of discussions on AI, a lot of debates, a lot of exhibits, the robots, and so on and so forth. Some people describing the venue or the conference being very much futuristic. But why is this taking the center stage here? Is it really just, is it optics, or is it really about who's leading the growth in the future?
Well, I think it's very real what is happening in artificial intelligence, and it will have quite dramatic impact on production, on services from around the world, and of course also on security around the world. That's why there is so much attention. And by and large, you would think that artificial intelligence will be very positive in the long run because it will enhance human capabilities. It will help out with solving a number of the big issues that we have, be it in climate change, be it in aging. But in the short term, to medium term, we can see a lot of upheaval. And more so, it can also affect the security landscape around the world. So for now, we don't know how much is going to happen, but talking about this and looking at this from the start, from the perspective of what do we want to get out of AI is, I think, very important. It's appropriate to do it in China because China actually has made tremendous breakthroughs in AI. The DeepSeek moment, everybody talks about it, but it was truly a moment where you suddenly said, look, this is a time when AI can be done with, say, $5 to $10 million instead of $50 to $100 billion. And so suddenly that becomes a lot more accessible for good actors around the world, but also for not so good actors around the world.
There has been indeed a great focus on AI at the summit, as I said. Carl, China has been very strong at the application side of things to all technologies. But as Bert mentioned just now, the DeepSeek moment kind of wakes people up and makes people wonder, there could be something more to what the Chinese can do, what the Chinese are doing. Do you think the participants are going to be inspired by the Chinese experience with regard to AI so far? What can be taken away by the participants when it comes to what developing countries, what the Global South can do in terms of cutting-edge technology and research, not just applications?
So China is clearly one of the real world leaders in AI. And anyone who comes to China will really see this. I think that this is an important moment because maybe the last 2 years or so have been sort of just learning about the basics of AI. Now we're really starting to see the application of it. For example, I'm now doing some research and consulting around how companies can use AI not to drive efficiency, doing things faster, cheaper, et cetera, but to drive innovation. And this is something that Chinese companies are leading in. There are companies, for example, like the Hangzhou company Style 3D, that's using AI to figure out how to design clothes. So you can just write some text and it will come up with, for example, several different options that would be good if you say make a dress that has longer arms or a different lower neck or something like this. There are companies like here in the Greater Bay Area. I was recently talking to AstraZeneca, a pharmaceutical company that's now using AI to try to figure out what molecules are likely to work together in drugs rather than having to test a lot in laboratories. So it's being used a lot. And one thing that's been talked a lot about at the summer Davos this year is how AI can be combined with robotics. We now see a lot of robotics that are being used. I'm here in the Greater Bay Area, and neighboring Shenzhen in the Greater Bay Area is really the center for China of robotics. And one of the things about the Shenzhen robotics area is that there are so many companies, something like 74,000 companies. So you have a real ecosystem. So it's not just the great companies that are there, like Pudo dealing with service, or UB Tech dealing with the humanoid robots. But the bigger thing is that there's all these different smaller companies, one company making robot arms, one company dealing with LiDAR vision, and everything works in Shenzhen speed. That's super fast.
You touched upon some of the most important keywords, such as innovation, such as ecosystem. Dan Wang, let me ask you, China does seem to have a very strong momentum in terms of spurring innovation and then quickly transferring that into market application. While on the other hand, Premier Li in his address said China's tech innovation has an open source feature that the country is willing to share its development with the world, of course, developing countries as part of it. Why would China want to do that? How do you understand the rationale between China's policy or even strategy in terms of its AI development? On the one hand, going full speed ahead, but on the other hand, talking about being an open source development.
The open source will benefit actually all participants, because for a company like DeepSeek, for example, by giving the open source, it actually has directed a lot of the flows into its system. And over time, it gathers more data, and the innovation in the system will become easier. But simultaneously, for other companies, including companies in the US, by getting into the DeepSeek system, they gain additional efficiency at much lower cost. So this is a perfect example of how China model works at scale, and spillover, in fact, would improve the productivity.
Well, to think along some other perspective as a devil's advocate, wouldn't it make China's competitors stronger, Dan Wang?
Oh, for sure. By using something that at a higher cost efficiency, it is the fundamentals for company to improve profits. Because this world has really squeezed the margin for most of the companies in the industrial supply chain, and for them to get access to cheaper AI is actually pretty critical.
Bert, what is your understanding of the rationale behind Beijing's determination that in order to get better, it needs to be more, it needs to open wider?
Well, one is that you can tap.
Yeah, Bert, please.
Go ahead.
One is that you can tap in a bigger pool of people around the world, and not just in China or in the United States, for that matter. Second, if you think ahead and you start thinking about products that come out of AI or AI combined products, be it robotics or anything else, setting standards around the world is also going to be important, and therefore being as open as possible will maybe in the short term cost you something in competitiveness, but in the longer term, if you set the standards for AI around the world, that will be very powerful. So I think those are two factors that are important and emphasized by the Premier.
Yeah, the ecosystem that Carl Fei talked about, Bert, what is your understanding? Is there something that can be potentially emulated by other developing economies or even developed economies who wish to also ride on the tide of the AI-generated growth?
Well, so I mean, China has some distinct advantages. One, the number of people. Two, enormous amount of data. And three, enormous amount of talent. The investment that China has been doing over the past 20 years in education is almost unbeatable. So working with China is, for many countries around the world and for many companies around the world, is probably the better way to go. For some, including the United States, there is always this competition. There is the national security aspect of AI that would lead them to still try and be as much more independent from China as some other countries. So I think there's different choices to be made by different countries and different companies.
Carl, are you potentially worried that there will be a polarization of developments, that the global South developing countries would be more converging towards each other on certain issues, and then there will be the G7, the global West, the developed countries who will not want to share sensitive technology or cutting-edge technology with China, with their rivals in the developing country? Are you going to see potentially there will be different Davoses, people saying, we are playing among our group here, not necessarily the group there? Are we seeing that?
So I am concerned that there has become a big polarization in the world of primarily two groups, but maybe several groups. And I think this is a little bit ironic because the biggest criticism that foreign companies have consistently had towards China has been IP protection. And actually, in recent years, China has made huge strides forward in IP protection. Actually, most people are not actually understanding the current reality, but thinking about the reality of 5 and 10 years before. You can now win an IP lawsuit in China if you have patent infringement. What needs to change, maybe, is to be able to win a little bit larger sum of money like you could in Europe and the US. So I'm concerned about the polarization, but there's also a plus here. The plus is that I think the global South, rather than being a bunch of isolated countries, which has often been the case, is getting together more. I really appreciate China's efforts to reach out to Africa, for example, and to integrate more, but all of the global South. And so I think the global South is starting to have a larger voice that is representative of its growing economic importance and population importance in the world. That's encouraging to see.
Dan Wang, is China driven by reality, by the cold reality, or by its active choice that things are happening this way? Would it not be in China's interest that it continues to draw talents and good ideas from developed countries, as it was doing over the first 45 years of its opening up and reform?
Different countries are endowed with different type of talents. So for the US, the education system has still, to this day, producing the best engineers in the world, the best scientists in the world, and they have tremendous resources allocated to it. And China, over the years, has improved its education, but the system is really more geared towards the mass production. So we have a lot of the applied scientists, applied engineers. So it's very
Some
different.
people would disagree, Dan, here, that China is not producing the best, scientists, the best engineers. Some would say the Chinese system is equally capable of doing that.
Oh, of course. So I'm not saying that China cannot produce the world-class scientists or engineers, but just by the tradition. If we're talking about, say, the resources that universities can utilize for laboratories, for, say, the investment in the school experiment for biotech, for new energy, actually the universities in the US still has a way more. And for China, the massive market provide an experiment field to make things commercially more viable. So different countries has to take different comparative advantage. And I'm not saying that no one can learn from each other, but still comparative advantage is a real thing.
Well, certainly, I think it will be China's great loss if it, shuts its door to talents, to businesses, good practices from the West. But talking about China actually owe about, according to media reports, 60% of global AI patents as of April this year. So China seems to dominate that field, at least for the time being. How do you look at the kind of changes that are happening, the quality of China's talent, China's emphasis on protecting IP, and the implication of the race going forward, whether or not China wants to term it as a race?
Well, so as Carl said, I think China's made a big leap over the past 10 years in IP development, in IP protection, and you see that in the patent numbers. Not all of them are good. I mean, the system in China rewards patents a lot. So you get promoted if you get more patents as a researcher. That means that
I was going to ask you about the quality of the patents, yeah.
But even in the quality adjusted patents, you see a rise. And in some fields, and that includes AI, that includes robotics, it includes new materials, China is already at the cutting edge. So there's been a very, very rapid development. And frankly, a lot of that is driven by very focused government policy built on what started in 2005, the medium and long-term plan for science and technology development, made in China 2025, that has driven a lot of that innovation. So China's been very successful in that.
Carl, going forward, China's success is not everybody's dream. Some people have been saying, look, China, through industrial policy, basically there were a lot of bad mouthing of the Made in China 2035. So going forward, how is China going to go about achieving its goal?
So a couple things. First, if I could just basically briefly touch on the issue of, is China producing outstanding technology and people? China deserves a lot of credit for really improving the level of the universities and what they have produced. But there is a problem. Every country has some advantages and some disadvantages. And the problem is China still has way too much focus on memorization. The whole Gaokao system, which is the test to get into universities, is really focused around this. When I used to be dean of University of Nottingham Business School, China, students were constantly asking for a list of questions they would have on the test. That's just not the way that Nottingham, China works. Nottingham, China is encouraging creativity, and that is what is the strength of US universities as well. So I do think there's some scope for some adjustment there. But indeed, there is this polarization which we need to get over, and I think that China is doing some things to try to sort of encourage the world to say we're playing in a fair way. I think the China International Import Expo in Shanghai, which is a conference to try to attract foreign companies from around the world to trade with China and sell their products in China, is a very interesting interesting initiative. I mean, very few companies, rather countries, have such a conference to help foreign countries and companies to be more successful in China. So I think we see some initiatives like this, but probably all of us in the world need to understand each other better so that we can hopefully work better together.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be a long way, right? We already come from a very long way and from a very low starting point. People had very stereotyped perspective on China, and that the past 10 years was still too short to change the understanding that had been held for decades. We'll need some time, but thank you to my guests, Dan Wang joining us from Shanghai, Bert Hofman joining us from Singapore, and Cao Fei joining us from Guangdong. A very important discussion. Likely we'll continue to focus on all of these going forward. Thank you very much for joining us. As usual, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Li Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, you've got the point. Thanks for watching.